Let's talk about the biology of heat and heating and the health benefits and tools related to heat and heating. We heat up two ways. We heat up from the outside, meaning the things that we come into contact with, the clothing that we put on our body, whether or not there's heat in the room or whether or not it's cold outside or cold in a room. And we heat up from the inside. Our body has the capacity to generate more heat or to cool down, meaning to turn off the heating process. And it can do that in ways that match the external environment. Your brain has neurons that send signals to other cells in your body and deploy the release of chemicals in your brain and body to heat you up when you are too cold and to cool you down when you are too hot. So if you can understand that you have two body temperatures, one at your shell, the surface, and one at your core, inside, and that your body and brain are always trying to balance those two temperatures in the appropriate way, well, then you're halfway there to understanding the biology of thermal regulation and heating, and you'll be a lot further along in understanding how specific tools can be used to improve metabolism or improve cognition, for instance. So anytime we're talking about heat, meaning deliberate heat exposure, things like sauna, it's very important to understand not just the stimulus, how hot something is, how long you're in a sauna, etc., but the effect that has on your shell and on your core. If you can understand that, you can design protocols that are literally perfect for your goals. And as a final point about this, if you want to develop the best tools leveraging heat for your biology and health and performance, you want to understand heat as a process, as a verb, as heating, not just heat. Because there's the temperature that you are at before you encounter the heat stimulus, before you get in the sauna, for instance, during the heat stimulus, so while you're in the sauna, and then afterward. Everything in biology is a process. So as you'll soon learn, there is a specific sauna protocol that can allow anybody, in fact, to increase the amount of growth hormone released into their brain and body 16-fold. That's right, 16-fold. It involves shifting from a hot environment to a cool environment to a hot environment to a cool environment over and over and over again over a very short period of time, because it engages a switch, a process that compounds, it builds on itself to increase growth hormone further and further. In fact, if you were to just get into a sauna for a very long period of time and crank up the temperature to match the exact temperature that was used in that study, you would not experience those increases in growth hormone. It really is the transition between hot and cool temperatures that engage the process of heating and reheating over and over again. Now, the science of heat and heating, and cold and cooling for that matter, goes back well over 100 years. But first, I'd like to just emphasize that the use of deliberate heat exposure can be a very powerful way to improve health and longevity. There's a wonderful study on this that was published in 2018 that includes a lot of data from a lot of participants in a lot of different conditions. For instance, people that only did sauna once versus 2 to 3 times a week versus 4 to 7 times a week, and so on, and compares all those. The title of the study is "Sauna Bathing is Associated with Reduced Cardiovascular Mortality and Improves Risk Prediction in Men and Women, a Prospective Cohort Study." This is one of several papers that clearly demonstrate that regular use of sauna or other forms of deliberate heat exposure can reduce mortality to cardiovascular events, but also to other events, things like stroke and other things that basically can kill us. They involve a lot of participants. So for instance, in this particular paper, which was published in BMC Medicine, they looked at a sample of 1,688 participants who had a mean age of 63, but there was a range of ages around 63. And of whom 51.4% were women, the rest were men. So it's a pretty nicely varied study in terms of the populations that they looked at. And basically what they found was the more often that people do sauna, the better their health is and the lower the likelihood they will die from some sort of cardiovascular event. The temperature ranges that were used in this study, and pretty much all the studies that I'm going to talk about, unless I say otherwise, are between 80 degrees Celsius, meaning 176 degrees Fahrenheit, and 100 degrees Celsius, meaning 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So somewhere in that range. How hot should you make the sauna or the environment that you get into, should you decide to use these tools? Well, that will depend on your tolerance for heat, how heat adapted you are. Yes, some people are better at sweating than others, and over time, we all get better at sweating, meaning if you go into the sauna more frequently, you become a better sweater. So it's going to depend. I recommend starting on the lower end of the temperature scale, and if that's too hot for you, that you even lower the temperature further. Now, how long were people exposing themselves to these hot environments? Anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes per session. And as you'll soon learn, very brief periods of just 5 minutes of heat exposure can be a powerful stimulus if the heat exposure is significantly great enough for you. 80 to 100 degrees Celsius, meaning 176 degrees Fahrenheit to 212 degrees Fahrenheit, is the general range that this and most studies use. In this particular study, they compared the effects of people that did sauna once a week, 2 or 3 times per week, or 4 to 7 times per week. And what they saw was really remarkable. What they observed was that people who went into the sauna 2 or 3 times per week were 27% less likely to die of a cardiovascular event than people that went into the sauna just once a week. So these data point to the fact that going in the sauna 2 or 3 times per week is really beneficial and can lower mortality to cardiovascular events. And in fact, the benefits were even greater for people that were going into the sauna 4 to 7 times per week. Those people were 50% less likely to die of a cardiovascular event compared to people that went into the sauna just once a week. Now, there have been additional analyses of the use of sauna for improving health, or I should say for offsetting mortality, that have found that it's not just reductions in cardiovascular events, but so-called all-cause mortality. This is kind of medical geek speak. We're saying, how likely are you or somebody to die from a cardiovascular event, but maybe also from some other event, some other health-related event, like cancer or something of that sort. And in every case, regular exposure to sauna, starting at about 2 or 3 times per week, all the way up to 7 times per week, greatly improves, meaning statistically significant improvements in longevity, in the sense that people are less likely to die of cardiovascular events and other things that kill us. However, there have been interesting studies done in humans examining some of the downstream molecular pathways of deliberate heat exposure that point to the mechanisms by which deliberate heat exposure can help protect against different forms of mortality, improve health overall, and possibly, and I want to highlight possibly extend life. One such mechanism involves a genetic program involving a molecule called FOXO3. The point is that throughout our entire lifespan, genes are being turned on, genes are being turned off. Genes are being turned on, genes are being turned off, and DNA, the stuff of genes, gets damaged in that process. FOXO3 sits upstream in a pathway related to DNA repair and, again, clearing of these senescent cells. Sauna exposure, in particular sauna exposure 2 to 3 times, or ideally 4 to 7 times per week, in that 80 to 100 degree Celsius range, has been shown to upregulate levels of FOXO3. FOXO3, in turn, upregulates pathways related to DNA repair and clearing out of these senescent or dead cells, which is known to be important for various aspects of maintaining cognition and other aspects of maintaining health. One especially interesting thing about FOXO3, there are individuals out there that have either additional copies of FOXO3 or who have versions of FOXO3 that are hyperactive, so to speak. Those people tend to be 2.7 times more likely to live to 100 years of age or longer. What I'm about to describe is a study that found really dramatic, I should say, increases in growth hormone. But I also want to emphasize that these increases in growth hormone were not of the sort that are observed in puberty or in infants becoming adolescents or adolescents growing into teenagers. Those levels of growth hormone that are associated with those massive transformations, of body morphology, of shape, are far greater than the sorts that I'm talking about here. And yet, as all of us age, when we go from adolescence to our teenage years and then into young adulthood, but then starting in our early 30s or so, the amount of growth hormone that we secrete is greatly diminished. Normally, we would release growth hormone every night after we go to sleep, in particular in the early part of the night when our sleep is comprised mostly of slow wave sleep. As we age, less growth hormone is released during that slow wave sleep. There are various things that can promote the release of growth hormone, and we will talk about some of those other things in a moment. Things like low blood sugar, turns out, is a stimulus for growth hormone release. And one study in particular that discovered certain forms of deliberate heat exposure using sauna can stimulate very large increases in growth hormone output, which for people in their 30s, 40s, and beyond could be very useful, and may also be useful for people who are just trying to stimulate the release of more growth hormone in order to, for instance, recover from exercise or stimulate fat loss or muscle growth or repair of a particular injury. So let me describe what they did in this study. They used an 80 degrees Celsius environment, so that's 176 degrees Fahrenheit, and they had subjects do this sauna for 30 minutes 4 times per day. So that's 2 hours total in one day. 30 minutes in the sauna, a period of cool down rest, 30 minutes in the sauna again, cool down rest, a third and a fourth time. Okay, so 2 hours total in this 80 degrees Celsius environment. So that's a lot, but what they observed was really quite significant. So they had subjects do this protocol, and I should mention they had both male and female subjects in this study. And the entire study lasted a week. They did this 2 hours of sauna exposure on day 1, day 3, and day 7 of that week. And they measured a lot of different hormones: cortisol, thyroid stimulating hormone, thyroid hormone itself, luteinizing hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone, which are hormones that essentially drive the production of other hormones. They looked at prolactin and they looked at growth hormone. I'll just cut to the chase and tell you the effects on growth hormone. In subjects that did this 2 hour a day, 80 degree Celsius protocol, experienced 16-fold increases in growth hormone. So they measured growth hormone before the sauna and after the sauna, and growth hormone levels went up 16-fold, which is obviously an enormous and, it turns out, statistically significant effect. On day 3, however, there was still a significant effect on growth hormone as compared to before sauna, but that effect was basically cut by 2/3. Okay, so now instead of getting a 16-fold increase, it was more like a 3 or 4-fold increase, which is still a huge increase, but not as great as the increase observed on day 1. And then on day 7, there tended to be a 2, maybe a 3-fold increase, but not as great as the one observed on day 1. If you start doing deliberate heat exposure more often, you'll still get increases in growth hormone, but they are not going to be nearly as large as the increases in growth hormone that you're going to experience if you shock your system with deliberate heat exposure every once in a while. In an acute way that allows mood to improve after the sauna exposure. So for those of you that don't like heat exposure, keep in mind that a lot of the observed positive effects on our biology relate to metabolism, cardiovascular function, but also mental health. And along those lines, there's a wonderful study, again, published in 2018. I don't know why. I guess 2018 was a big year for deliberate heat exposure studies. The title of this study is Sauna Bathing and Risk of Psychotic Disorders. And this was a prospective cohort study. Again, we'll provide a link to this study. It's a really interesting study that explored the relationship between mental health, so people suffering from various forms of psychoses, schizophrenia and other forms of psychoses, and use of sauna. So essentially what this study did is they looked at a very large number of subjects, more than 2,000 subjects, who had no history of psychotic disorders. They were classified into 3 groups based on their frequency of sauna use, either once a week, 2 to 3 times per week, or 4 to 7 times per week. This should call to mind that earlier study on all-risk mortality and cardiovascular event risk. And then they explored the hazard ratio for psychosis specifically, meaning how likely it was that people would develop psychotic symptoms or full-blown psychotic illness according to their frequency of sauna session. So again, this isn't causal, this is correlative. And according to the data in this study, what they concluded is that there was a strong and inverse independent association between frequent sauna bathing and the future risk of psychotic disorders in this population. Now, subjects they included, plus the rigor of the statistical analysis, was trying to see a general picture that using the sorts of sauna protocols that I've described throughout this episode, right, 5 to 20 minutes or so, done 1 to 7 times per week, is associated with a general improvement in cardiovascular health, a general improvement in mental health. And it really points to the fact that, yes, sauna done acutely for 3 or 4 times a day, 30 minutes each session, separated by a cooling, maybe getting into cold bath. Sure, that can potently increase growth hormone, but done on a more regular basis can reduce cortisol, improve heart health, improve mental health. And for that reason, and the fact that for most people, it is conceivable to come up with a way that you could get into deliberate heat exposure for a minimum of cost, right? It's a hot bath, or if you had to resort to, bundling up and going for a jog, this sort of thing, or if you have access to it, a sauna of some sort, that we're really talking about a stimulus to initiate a large number of different biological cascades that wick out to improve multiple aspects of brain and body health.